Hi everyone, welcome to today's live Q&A session with MD Consultants. My name is Gaya. I'm a candidate at the Western University entering the third year of the MD program. Today's discussion is going to be centered around Canadian medical school interviews, and I'll be answering a list of questions that have been compiled by students. This will be mostly based on my own experiences as a Western medical student and as a prior applicant to other Ontario medical schools. If you have any questions for me during the course of the session, please feel free to post them or type them into the comment box below, and I'll do my best to get to as many of them as possible before our session ends today at 8 p.m. So some of the questions that I have here is it best to present an overarching story through your extracurriculars? For example, having an extracurricular experience that leads to another, for example, to research or a publication, and then subsequently to a master's degree? Or would a narrative like this seem limited in scope and potentially seem like you're plotting for medical school? So I think when it comes to your extracurriculars, you should really aim to ensure that the experiences that you are showcasing about yourself on these medical school applications are very much a passion or a very much an interest to yourself and to your future career in medicine. So I think if you even if you have different extracurriculars that may, at a first glance, may not seem kind of tethered together or seem connected, I think it would be okay as long as you're really interested and engaged in that particular activity. For example, one of the biggest things that I was involved in, it was a student-run organization where I had an opportunity to work with marginalized communities in Latin America and be able to provide sustainable education and health projects to help these communities. But from that, I've also worked, in the opposite lens to just working in an academic center, working on research centered around cancer care or providing supports to first-year students who need help and they need mentorship and they are looking for supports to transition into university atmosphere. So I mean, really looking at research and talking about international outreach and mentorship at a local level, they don't really have one strong piece that connects one to the next in terms of how the activity progresses through time. But I mean, those are activities that I was really passionate about, that I was very interested in, and if I can showcase my interest or passion in the setting of an interview, I think that shows across as being very genuine, and I think that's what people are really looking for at the end of the day. They want candidates that are very well-rounded, who can really feel connected to the community around them, regardless of how the narrative looks like. Also, just to play the devil's advocate to this question, I think one of the other notable points I'd like to make is having that overarching theme through your extracurriculars. If you do have something that really resonates with you, whether it's working with children or whether it's research, if they can see that there's continuity in your involvement, whether research from an undergraduate level through a master's level, where that's led you to present at conferences locally, nationally, internationally, and you produce publications and have gotten a master's degree out of it, I think, again, that really shows that you've been so engaged in the work that you do and that you're committed and dedicated to those activities. And I think that does speak very strongly as well. So I think in this question, really, there's no one right or wrong. It's really about finding something that is very meaningful to you and making sure that that the dedication, no matter what kind of activity it is, that it is kind of consistent through time. And if you can do that, I think you've really achieved your purpose here in terms of the medical school applications. And And I'm gonna go here, jumping on to some of the other questions that have been posted to me. A lot of the times I hear medical student applications, one of the biggest challenges that students have is finding reference letters. So this question kind of addresses that. How can I ask my mentors for a reference letter? Is there a polite way of asking them to have more details or highlight on certain characteristics that I want to get across in that reference letter? So asking a reference letter can be a little tricky. I think it does take a certain amount of planning and poise. If you have a mentor that you have in mind, whether it's a research supervisor, a professor, a physician, I think first you really need to have some sort of relationship there. You've had to have some sort of opportunity to build rapport with them. I think that would be very, very key to get a good letter. And once you really have that, if you can ask them whether it's, if they're accessible by email or in person, asking them, would you be able to write me a strong letter of recommendation for my medical school application? I think a lot of the times I've heard students asking, hey, can I have a reference letter for medical school? And if they've seen you, they've worked with you, they'll be like, sure, yeah, I'll give you a letter of reference. But I think it's really key to highlight the fact that you want a strong letter of support. And really most professionals and mentors, they're so great about letting you know whether they can or can't do that for you. So some of them, if they don't feel like they've known you well enough, or they haven't had the opportunity to engage with you in the right ways to really showcase that, what, I can write this positive letter of recommendation, they will let you know. And that's the first step, is just really figuring out what they're able to do for you. And once they've agreed, to writing you a letter, how do you ask them to write a very detailed letter, that incorporates a lot of details about your character, your personality, your achievements, and how do you get those characteristics really to come across? And so, to really ensure that we can do that successfui, the main thing is, I found in my experience, is to suggest, writing or giving them the opportunity to include, to kind of give them a template, as in like giving them your CV, your resume, and also bullet point listing your major accomplishments, your schooling, your education, any sort of even points about, why are you so passionate about medicine? What are you hoping to achieve from this path? And if so, in bullet point form, if you sent them a list of all of these items, I think it can really be meaningful. It shows that you're really prepared, and that also you may know that a lot of these mentors, physicians, faculty members are very, very busy people, and they often are bombarded to get to write reference letters for so many people all at once. And so if you were able to kind of help that process along by already kind of giving them, these are all the different things about me that I really love for you to write about if you're interested, and you can just have them very specifically outlined, and they can pick and choose what they like to share. And I think one of the things that I also personally have done that I found to be very, very meaningful is to include a description of the CanMed framework. So the CanMed framework highlights the major pillars of characters and qualities that all of the schools in Canada would like to see in a medical school student. And so, just saying that, these are the kind of characteristics that that medical schools look for. If you find that I meet any of them, or you found any of those resonate with you about myself, and you would like to showcase them in the letter, say that you would really appreciate it. And I think really that would go a long way. Giving them all the resources that they need to write a good, strong letter is so important. And be kind and thankful, show your gratitude for the time that they take to write your letter, and it should really go a long way. All right, so I'm just looking here. So one of the other questions that I've received is, can I include a course-based project that I did as part of my extracurriculars? So I think with this, it's a little tricky how you can use this information. So if you did do a project as a part of your course requirement, technically that is not counted as part of your extracurriculars. If it was at all any project or initiative that met an academic requirement, it has to be included in a different way. However, if let's say you did a project related to social outreach or social innovation or anything like that in a course-based setting, but you continue to take a hold of that project or initiative past the requirements of your course, and you were able to do that for a whole summer or many months after the course ended, and you were partaking in those activities solely out of your own interest and passion, then I think that would be definitely appropriate to include in the extracurricular section. But those are, again, just like small technicalities. It's just about understanding where you could include them. But certainly if you did do a project that was really meaningful, you can include it as long as it went past the timeline of your course. All right, here. And again, just if anybody has any questions, please feel free to post in the comment box and I'll be happy to answer your questions. I'm just going along here with a list of compiled questions that I have from students, and I will be answering those questions here. So, do medical schools look down on taking part-time courses in the summer and full-time courses during the regular school year? I absolutely think that it's not the case. Medical schools certainly do not look down on students that are enrolled in part-time classes during the summer. In fact, if I were to talk to a lot of program directors that I'm personally connected with, they would say we want our students to pursue in other activities outside of academia and really show that they're well-rounded, whether it's volunteering, partaking in any projects within your community, doing research, and even in traveling with certain kind of purposes. Like, people really appreciate those kind of activities in the summertime, so you don't need to be taking courses. However, just to clarify, some of the schools do require that you take full-time courses during the regular school year. Some of them are a little bit more lenient with it across Canada, but mostly speaking, you do need to be required, so you do need to be enrolled in full-time courses during the regular academic school year. Whatever you do in the summer isn't really a part of that discussion, just to clarify. So I have a question here. How effective could research experience be in your application? For example, for someone with a GPA around 3.9, if you'd rather get a job instead of doing research, would that slightly disadvantage me? I think that so if someone had a GPA of 3.9, that's really commendable. That's great. You've already kind of at that point shown that you are intelligent, you're capable of, you have all the competencies you need to excel in an academic setting, which is wonderful. So your main conundrum is, should you do research versus doing a job? I personally don't think that you taking a job versus research would disadvantage you. I think that if you really look at a lot of the students that are applying to medical schools, everyone comes from unique circumstances and backgrounds. And so some people, they might not even have a choice and they might have to work. And so, being able to support those students is very important to a lot of medical schools. So if you do need to work instead of doing research, that is absolutely okay. And especially if it's a really even a really meaningful job in the realm, or even if it's not and you have to work at a fast food restaurant, it doesn't matter. If you have to work because that's how you're supporting yourself or your family, that's totally fine. In terms of having research as part of your application, I would recommend that you try to do research at some point, just to show that you are kind of engaged in scientific research, and that you have some sort of interest in it. Usually I say that now is because if you understand at an earlier point whether you like research or not, it will help you down the road, especially when you're a medical student, to do research, because that will be most definitely be required of you throughout your education program, just to even for residencies, programs and things like that. It's great to have that experience and to know whether it's something that you foresee for yourself for your own future. So I find that it's always really helpful to have that experience, but I don't necessarily think that it's the most important. I know a lot of medical students that don't have research experience who are who've done a lot of other great activities on their CV, and they're very well-rounded people, and they've gotten into medical school. So, okay, I'm just going here for other questions. So I have a question here. I'm planning to write my MCAT in January 2019, but I'm worried that I will not be able to study throughout the school for it. How can I keep focused on the MCAT, school, and extracurriculars all at the same time? So writing the MCAT in January can certainly be tough. I assume that if someone was doing that, they're just trying to do it at that point instead of doing it in the summer for whatever reason. It will certainly be challenging to be able to study for the MCAT throughout an academic year when you already have a full course load, and you may have other extracurriculars or other responsibilities that are ongoing. And I especially think that you don't want to be sacrificing your GPA in favor of the MCAT. The GPA is very, very important, and you want to make sure that you're able to give your best during your full academic term. And the MCAT is also a very rigorous process. There's a lot of information to learn, and on average, it takes students at least a month to 2 months of full-time studying to really prepare for it. So with that being said, I think it may be difficult to do during the academic year, but I know a lot of people that are also very committed and dedicated who can do all. And if that's you, I think that would be fine. If you know that you're able to handle a huge workload, and you know how to manage your time well, you know how to manage your stress well, and you know that you can balance all of those different plates at the same time, then absolutely go for it. I think, but again, it really comes down to making sure you have those skills really well managed, like making sure you're very organized with your coursework, time, and stress. I think if you can do that, then it should be totally fine to write an MCAT during the January time period. All right. So I have a question here. I have a great GPA and MCAT score, but not a lot of extracurriculars. Now in my 4th year, I'm planning to do a lot of activities. Are there ones that I should prioritize? I think this kind of goes back to the very first question that came up. And so having a great GPA and MCAT is great. I think those two things are extremely important to medical schools to show that you have those academic competencies that to be able to excel in medical school. And so those are very important, and it's good that those scores are high. But at the same time, extracurriculars are also very, very important. It shows that how human we all are, what our passions are, what our interests are, and what makes you you. And so extracurriculars are very, very important in bringing out the unique strengths and characteristics that you hold as a person. And those are the things that most of the times will distinguish you from one applicant who also has a great GPA and an MCAT versus someone else who has all of that, but also has extracurriculars. They really, I think, especially in this time and age, we are serving a very diverse group of patients. We want to see that that our future physicians have that sense of humanity, that sense of connection with community, a passion for the work that they do, and their dedication to the work that they do. And I think those things are harder to capture with just looking at your GPA and MCAT score. And also even just things like communication skills, like your soft skills. How well do you work with your team? How do people receive you when they meet you? How do you support the team members? How do you deal with problem solving when you're working in a team atmosphere and it's challenging? So when you work in activities outside of school, people are really able to get a sense of how you are, and this is how also you get reference letters, right? It's really difficult to get good reference letters just from professors who just know you from your academic standpoint. They may be able to write pages and pages about how well you performed in a class and how many A's you got in that course, but really it's hard, especially in an undergraduate level, having a connection with a professor or a mentor who can also speak to you, the person that you are outside of school. And I think really extracurriculars do a great job and give people an opportunity to demonstrate those kind of aspects of an individual. So in terms of prioritizing the activities, during your fourth year, if you're interested in extracurriculars, again, it goes back to what are you interested in? What makes you you and unique? Is it the fact that you're interested in the pediatric population, or do you just love music and art? So it can be anything that you want it to be, as long as people can see from your personal essays, your interviews that he or she really loves this, and that's why she's doing it. And again, that's what people are looking to see. A question I have here, how stellar do your extracurriculars need to be? I have about 4 meaningful activities that I was engaged in for at least 1 year in each. What do you think about that? So, I don't know how, I guess to break that question out a little bit, in terms of how stellar it needs to be, I think that's something that you define, what, all the things that you got out of that extracurricular. So for me, I had, if I were to go back and think about some of the activities that I did in undergraduate, my master's degree, there's only one real activity that keeps coming to my mind, and it always does because I was so involved in it for a long period of time, is where I got to work with an organization called Students Offering Support. We tutored students on campus, and also we raised money to implement sustainable education and health projects in marginalized communities in Latin America. And so, that was the one activity. And so a lot of the work that I did stemmed off of that. Every interview, there was a lot of interview questions for different schools where I talked about my experience from SOS, or I would talk about my experience working in working with a marginalized community in Peru. And I talked about how those interactions were what I learned, all the problem solving, challenges that I came across during those activities. So really, I don't think that it has to be a lot of different activities. I think if you have a few quality, meaningful activities, that's all that's all that matters. And the fact that, you know, you've been engaged in those activities for at least 1 year, at least, that's so good. I think the fact that you can show that you're committed and dedicated to those initiatives are very meaningful to medical schools. And these are the things that you're going to talk about in your interviews. So again, it's not about the number, it's about the quality. And to be honest, and sometimes it's not even about the time. For example, recently I was involved as a med student. I was involved in a mental health project, and I worked in the project for 2 weeks, but it was a life-changing experience within just those 2 weeks. And I will be going forward for the next year to produce a project. And so, I mean, just those 2 weeks of engagement have been so meaningful enough. And so I'm going to probably be putting that into my own CV down the road. And so it really isn't about the time sometimes either. If it's quality experiences and you can speak so much about it, that is the most important thing you can take away. So I have a question here about some reference letters. Are reference letters only 1 to 2 paged typed letter, or is there an application form portion for my references that would have to be filled out? So apart from your referees having to send in their reference letter, which can be, you know, 1 to 2 page, you do have to have them submit, at least for OMSAS, you have to have them submit a form that's called a confidential assessment form. And so when you go through that form, there's a sample of it that you can see online, but you would give that to your referee, and they would be able to fill out questions related to your characters, your strengths, and they have some sort of rating scale, if I remember correctly, about you know, your own character and strengths, and what they think, why they think that you should pursue medical school, and why you make a great physician one day. And so that's something that they will fill out confidentially. And usually they, I don't know if they've changed the process online for it, but they either submit it on their own online or they mail it in along with your reference letter. All right. And we're just about to meet the halfway mark of our live session. And just to kind of reintroduce myself to anyone who's joined us recently on the live session, my name is Gaya. I'm one of the medical school students at the Western University in London, Ontario. I'm just about to start the 3rd year of my program. And today, all the questions that we'll be talking about relate to medical school interviews or applications. And so please feel free to post any questions that you may have in our comment box below. All right. So I have a question here regarding GPA. If I have a low GPA, and it specifically notes 2.5, from my first undergraduate degree, is it worth doing another one to increase my GPA? And also, will it be only my second degree that gets counted if I apply after I finish? So if you're applying with a low GPA, definitely, you know, each university does have their own cutoffs. You know, every school is very different, but usually it could range anywhere from, you know, 3.6 and above, and some schools that might be even lower. I'm not sure of all the Canadian schools, especially in the out west and out in the east. But usually they have a cutoff that you'd have to meet, and I know, you know, even if I don't know the exact numbers at the top of my head, usually they're well above, you know, 3.3. I haven't seen anything lower than that. So if you do have a GPA of 2.5, I don't think that it's be all end all for your dreams to pursue medicine. I do believe that doing another degree at that point may be worth your while if you're so committed and passionate about doing medical school. I mean, the first thing is to make sure that your marks are high and that you can bring up your GPA. And if you can do that with another degree, that would be totally fine. And just to kind of break this down a little bit more. Some schools also do want to understand why you may have had low GPA. For example, Western University does such a great job trying to understand why, let's say, a particular year or a particular 2 years may have been very bad for you academically speaking. So if there were any extenuating circumstances that constrained you from performing at your best, then it is something that you can share with the school as part of your application process. I do believe there's a section there for explaining why your marks are the way they are, and that's something to take advantage of. And some schools like Toronto do drop their lowest six course marks as well when they calculate their GPA. So I think there's a lot of different consideration too. You need to really understand how GPA is being calculated for each school, and making sure that you're calculating it correctly as well. So you're not assuming that, whatever you see as your cumulative GPA on your transcript, that's the GPA that the schools are going to see. It could really vary from one school to the next. And so doing another degree, again, with the 2.5, if it is calculated appropriately, you could definitely do another degree, and they will see that you, if you were able to go from 2.5 to 3.7, they can really see that how you're committed and that you do have the competencies. And if you put a GPA like that with a good MCAT score, I think you're really in the right path. So I have a question here. Do you have any advice for how to approach the U of T and the recent UWO essays? So I've applied to U of T before, and I interviewed there. So I've applied twice to U of T, where 1 year I really didn't focus too much on the essay component for U of T, and it was just very last minute. I knew that the rest of my application was great, versus another year where I really put a lot of effort. And so the first year, when I didn't put any effort into the essays, I didn't get an interview at U of T. And the next year that I applied to U of T, I didn't change anything else in my application at all. The only thing that changed was the essays, and I got an interview. So that just goes to show how important that essay section is for Toronto. They really use that space to really engage in how you communicate, how you think, and they just really, those are characteristics that Toronto really looks for in their applicants, being able to communicate in a specific way. And so for Toronto essays, I would really think about I really think about just breaking down the questions, spending time trying to understand what they're asking. And when you write the essays, one of the things that I've noticed with looking at a lot of different applications and reviewing them is students tend to just respond to the questions in a very like a matter-of-fact way. They'll say, they'll just respond to it like how you may respond when I'm asking you a question in person, and it's very almost casual. And I've noticed with Toronto, they love to have more art and more. They love to hear an artistic way of being able to express. And so if you can find a way to share with them your thoughts, your perspectives and opinions about the question and the question stem, and you're able to translate that into a very artistic form and be able to respond to it in a way that is very unique, I think people really appreciate it. And one of the other tips that I always give students is when you write Toronto essays, think about it like you're giving a pitch to someone in an elevator. Like how are you going to pitch yourself or pitch the topic that you've been given? You have to have a hook. Your first sentence in that essay, especially because you don't have a lot of space to work with, that first 2-3 sentences have to be your hook and grab the reader's attention, because you have to remember that these reviewers are looking at so many thousands of applications. So how is yours going to stand out? So you need to make sure that that first sentence, the second sentence, those are going to capture the audience's interest and really engage them. And then you can talk more about whatever topic you've been given. And in terms of the UWO essays, so they've been for people that haven't had a chance to look at it, it's called an abbreviated autobiographical sketch. And so what it is basically condensing the ABS items into the most important and significant items that you would like to showcase about yourself. I think the reason that they've started doing that from some of the engagement that I personally had with them is because with the actual ABS on OMSAS, it's hard to get a picture of which activities are most meaningful, especially because you have some 40-some slots of all the different things that you've ever done in your life that you could put on there. The most important things tend to really get lost in that. And so the schools have a hard time of picturing or painting a picture of how that candidate looks like. What are their interests? What are they passionate about? What makes them unique? And so having this new format of the abbreviated version really helps Western kind of filter through that process a little bit more, and it gives them it portrays a better picture of who you are. So I think they're not really trying to trick you in any way. I think they're just trying to make sure they don't miss anything from that may have been missed in previous years with the ABS, because it is so verbose and long, and it's hard to figure out what is the most important items that the students really care about. It's a good question. All right, I'm just looking here for other questions. Again, feel free to post your questions below whenever anything comes up. So let's see here. I have some questions here about verifiers. So it says one of my verifiers does not speak English. Is this an issue with OMSAS? That can be a little tricky. So the purpose of having a verifier is to ensure that whatever activity or extracurricular items that you've placed into your OMSAS application is valid, and that it can be verified by someone who can say, yes, Michael has worked at the Cancer Center for 3 years, 10 hours every week, something like that. So, I mean, that's first of all, just reading that, the schools are like, wow, that's a lot of commitment. Like, that's wonderful. And they want to just call up anybody in charge at, let's say, Cancer Care Ontario to say that, this is in fact true. And so let's say if it's in a scenario where someone doesn't speak English, that can be a little challenging, and it does place a barrier. It would be impossible for OMSAS to verify whether the activity you placed on there is true or not. So I think personally, like, while we don't want to discriminate at any point, or, if you did work somewhere where, they didn't speak English, we don't want to make sure that opportunity isn't missed, but at least try to make a note of it. Or if you know of someone else who can verify it for you on their behalf, especially because they don't speak English, that would really be best. I'm sure, if you have a mentor or a professor who knows that you did do work in, let's say, China, and you volunteered there as an English teacher, maybe there's someone there, here who knows about the work that you did who can verify. So there are some leeways there. So it's just something to think about. Another question I have here is, what is the GPA you need to maintain for the application year? I know schools wouldn't consider that while reviewing your application, but in case you get accepted. So I'm just trying to understand the question here. So what is the GPA you need to maintain? Yeah, so thing is, I don't know how each schools work in with scenarios like this. Oftentimes, the GPA, the MCAT cutoffs, they change every single year, and I'm not privy to whether those cutoffs are set earlier on in the year, or so for example, before applications are even brought in, or if they're done at, like, kind of almost like real time as they look at the applicants coming in, because you'll notice, and I think it's, to be honest, it's a combination of both from what I'm thinking, because every year I've noticed that it gets more and more competitive, and sometimes like schools also draw back on some of the cutoffs, which is also good. But I think it really depends on the pool of applicants. Sometimes you are competing with the bestest of the best, and so at that point, just so that medical schools can slowly screen their applications, they will kind of raise their cutoffs a little bit, because everybody's just so good and everybody's got the highest of marks. And so I mean, at that point the schools are kind of forced to have higher cutoffs, because that's kind of the numbers that are kind of going through the applications. So I think it's hard to really know that, you know, this is the GPA that you need. I would always go off of whatever is posted on the school's admissions requirements. If they've blatantly stated that, you know, for this year that this is the cutoff, or this is a GPA that we're looking for, then kind of go by that. The GPA is usually like advertised on most schools' websites. I think the only cutoffs that tend to change and be more fluctuant is related to the MCAT, and that does tend to vary. But even the GPA, like, again, if you go back year to year, they posted the average GPA, and it changes every single time. So it's really hard to say what you need for the specific application cycle. I would just say if you meet the minimum, don't worry too much about it. At this point, you can't change your GPA, but usually, you know, you're in control of your MCAT. You're in control of how well, you know, what kind of references letters you can get from your mentors and from your referees. So if you can make sure you do everything you can to help your referees write the best letter they can, and you do everything you can to write the best essays, and you're able to lay out the ABS or the autobiographical sketch on OMSAS really well, then you're doing everything that's in your power at that point. And I wouldn't worry too much about the GPA, because it's really hard to change it anyway, and it's kind of out of our control in general. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, so let me see here. Looking for other questions. Again, feel free to post your questions here, guys. I'd be happy to answer any of them. I have some more questions here about acceptance rates. Like, what is the acceptance rate of getting into Ontario medical schools for in-province applicants? Unfortunately, I don't know the statistics on that. Things, for example, that even varies for a school like Western, whether or not you're SWOMEN. For those of you who don't know what that is, if you're from Southwestern Ontario, those students do have different cutoffs for their GPA and MCAT. And so if, you know, when they get acceptances or they get interviews, they have a different acceptance rate compared to other in-province applicants as well. So it's not, there's no one answer really for this. I think it really depends. And I'm not really sure about the actual acceptance rate. So I'm sorry about that. Okay, so I have a question here about MAC. How much weight does McMaster put on the Casper exam? Do they look down on it if you redo the exam more than once? So as far as I know, McMaster has 4 different scores, or 4 different scores, I guess, yeah, that can influence your overall chances and weight on whether or not you receive an interview. And the first thing is, so 32% of their weight goes to your undergraduate GPA, and then 32% for the MCAT verbal reasoning or the critical analysis and reasoning score, and then another 32% just for the Casper score. And then if you have a graduate degree bonus, then you will get 4% extra, or up to 4% extra. So 1% for a master's and 4% kind of bonus for PhD. So those are kind of like extra points, but mostly the breakdown is 32, 32, 32, and then the 4% if you have a graduate degree. So that's, that's about, like 1/3 of your score is Casper. And so it is very important to them because they weigh it just as important, equally in terms of importance compared to GPA and MCAT. And so for MAC, and I believe even Ottawa now have adopted the Casper as part of their screening and as part of the application process. And for these schools, they've deemed it to be very important, and it's a great way for them to find the applicants that they're looking for. If you're able to respond to this kind of different kind of ethical scenarios and questions in a very time constrained setting, you can really learn a lot about the applicants. And so the Casper really does that. And so it is very important for them. In terms of, do they look down on it if you redo the exam more than once? Not really. I mean, there are people out there that apply every time. They've applied to 3 to 6 times, in some scenarios to medical school. And it's because they're just that, passionate, and they're really dedicated, trying as much as they can. And so if you want to, every time you do apply to medical school, you do have to rewrite the Casper. It's not that you can write it and you can set away the scores for future years. So usually they say, you have to rewrite it. And so it's just part of their process. And so if you have to rewrite the exam more than once because you just want to apply that many times, that's totally fine. And that wouldn't have any bearing on your acceptance. Okay. I'm just looking for other questions here. So I have a question here. I want to apply to medical school this year, but I've been so focused on my MCAT until now. Is it a good idea to start my application even this late in the process, even to be able to make the October 1st deadline? So a lot of students are in positions like this where they've taken the entire summer to write, study and write the MCAT, and they would have finished sometime early in August. And it is, I think, still very feasible to be able to make the October 1st deadline. I think at that point, because if you already haven't asked, definitely ask your referees for the recommendation letter as soon as possible. If you're one of those people who have not had a chance to reach out to them, you don't, just out of professional courtesy, you want to give them at least a month's time to be able to write that letter and not have to give them a short notice for something like this. So if you were to even do that now, like, you're still in good, and you're still doing good for time. So just definitely put that request in for anybody you're considering to have your to write your letters for you. And the second thing is, it's still fine to, start your applications. The applications do take a lot of time, but you still have a decent amount of time between now and October. And especially MD Consultants does an amazing job helping students prepare for their applications. So if you have never had the opportunity to reach out to us, definitely I would encourage that you do. I've worked with an incredible amount of pre-med students who are so passionate, and we have a great amount of skilled experts on our team that are residents, medical students, and physicians who are really wanting to see your success and who are committed to making sure that your applications are really reflective of who you are and that they showcase all of your strengths, and kind of really helps to portray you in the best light possible. And even though in terms of time, if you're worried about it, you can always contact us. But regardless, doing the ABS takes time, and then the essays take time. So if you can set yourself about 2 weeks to really focus on your applications, full time, I think that would be that'd be a good amount of time. The only reason why that might not work for some people, especially for someone like me, for essays, I really need to really think about the question stem for quite some time before I can start to understand what those questions really mean to me, and I'll start jotting down ideas over a period of weeks, and then I'll finally come to writing the actual essay, for example, for Toronto or any other schools that you might have to do essays for. So it's really possible. It's just about making sure you have the right resources to be able to do that. Again, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to post them below. I'm just looking for extra questions here. Let's see. I guess maybe just to take a bit of a break from questions, I'll just give you a brief background about my path to medicine, since I kind of forgot to do that in the beginning. I finished my undergraduate degree in Windsor, and my undergraduate degree was focused on biological sciences. And shortly after that, I pursued my master's in biology as well, and I did research with cancer epigenetics. And through that process, I had an opportunity to present at a number of different national and international conferences. I did get a publication out of the master's, which was great. And shortly after that, I actually worked for about a year at McMaster University at the Department of Surgery, where I got to do some cool work with some surgeons with their research. And then I ended up getting into Western University the year after that. So I kind of have a very long path to medicine, but I really, I feel like it's given me a lot of unique strengths and perspectives that are really going to shape how my own future looks like, in terms of, how I want my career in medicine to look like with research and such. So if you have any questions specifically about a path like that, or how you kind of navigate that, please feel free to post as well. Okay, so some of the questions, looking here. I'm just looking for application related questions. So just to kind of, I guess, shift the focus from the applications to interviews and how to prepare for it. I'm just looking for some questions based on that. So even a very generic question that you might have at an interview setting would be something like, why medicine? And it's something that honestly, if you, I know for many of you, it's still quite down the road. You haven't gotten to the point where you can start preparing for it. You're just applying, but it's just something good to think about, because there's a lot of work and time that goes into interview preparation, in terms of, how do you communicate yourself? How do you answer questions like, oh, tell me your top 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses, and even something so unique like Toronto, in their panel session, they've asked me questions like, if you had to make 3 different wishes, what would you wish for? What would you wish for? Or if you were stranded on a beach or in the middle of nowhere, what are the 3 items that you would take with you? So these are things. The interview questions can be very convoluted and so distant from medicine, and sometimes you don't understand why they're asking you these things. But for most of these questions, there's really no right or wrong answers. It's really a way for schools to understand a little bit about who you are, how you think, and what kind of unique perspectives and kind of background you bring with you, and whether that's something the school really wants. And so I don't really think there's right and wrong. I think you have to be very genuine in those questions. I think I found it personally helpful that even as I was going through, writing my application, even though I know it seems like very early on for a lot of you, to just even start thinking about, why do I want medicine? Why am I so attracted to this field? And start thinking about those kind of questions as you write your personal essays, or as you start really reflecting on how your application looks like. Those can be really, it can take you a step away from application to really give you to kind of give you the bigger perspective of all of this, why you're working so hard, and what you're really trying to get out of this entire process. And it helps to remind yourself, when you're so caught up with studying for the MCAT, working on these long applications, it can be immensely stressful. Just taking a few minutes away whenever you can to just think about, why you're doing all of this, and kind of remind yourself of that is very important, and it can help you down the future as well, as you prepare for interviews. All right, so we're nearing the last few minutes of our live Q&A session. I hope you found it very helpful for you so far. So I want to answer any one last question that you may have. So please feel free to post them right now if you have any questions. If not, I'll find one more question that I can address for you. All right. So I have a question here that I really like here. So if you could go back to your application cycle, what is the one thing that you would do differently? So in terms of my own application, I think I think it would have been to really, because I was just so caught up in making the deadlines. It was very stressful getting my references to give me the letters, and there were some delays on their end. So I was really pushed in time to get everything done on time. And so I think it was just, if I could go back, I would change a lot about my ABS. So my the autobiographical sketches. I wish that I had made them a little bit more personal, to showcase a lot of, for example, the characteristics that I thought my activity resonated with in the lens of the CanMeds role. So if I could go back, I would reword a lot of that, because I think that schools pay attention to those kind of things a lot more than we think, and it would really be really helpful if I could have done that. Okay, so I have a few more questions here, which I'll answer. How do medical schools view a fifth year of undergrad versus a master's program? To be honest, I don't think most schools really like care about that. I think if you want, a master's program is a huge commitment. It's asking a lot of time away from when you could be doing something else, like working or whatnot. And so if you're really passionate about your master's, do it, and make sure you have that passion for it. But I think for a lot of students, I think the fifth year is also very helpful too. If you're really doing it just to boost your mark and your GPA, I think it's very valuable. If you can get even a few points more by getting that extra year, it can really make a huge difference to your entire application cycle, whether or not you meet that cutoff or not. It can make a huge difference. So really, like I said, no big difference other than what you think you will get out of those experiences. So if that fifth year means that you will get, let's say, a very important time to do research that you want to do, but not necessarily as a master's program, or it's because you want to up your marks, then that's definitely a good choice. How heavy is medical school? How much time can you dedicate to activities outside of school? medical school is certainly very, very tough. It's a very rigorous, but at the same time, there have been times where my husband's like, you do a lot more things outside of school than studying. And so sometimes I think it's because for me personally, like I love school and I love to study, but that's not the only thing that I like to focus my energy on. I'm very involved in student government in my school. I'm also involved in the government's aspect in terms of the Canadian Federation of Medical Schools. So I'm very involved in that aspect. I'm very I partake in a lot of research projects. I do social innovation projects in health. So, I mean, I do a lot outside of medicine, but those are things that are very important to me. Whereas for others, they like to put that extra time that they have into studying a lot more. And so I think it's really about how you are as a person. I'm just not one to sit and study for a long period of time. I eventually need to do something else different. So I have time to go to the gym. I have time to, meet my friends, often, and spend time with family and friends. So really, it's about what you make out of it. There's lots and lots of time to do anything you want in medical school. There's no problem there. But that being said, the time that you do spend in school in your classes, they're very hard because it requires a great amount of attention and engagement, and you could be sitting at a lecture hall for about 8 hours every single day, learning very complex new material about every single body system that you could think of, and it can be very, very heavy when you're doing that, but there's also time outside of that. All right, so that concludes our live Facebook Q&A session. I really want to thank every one of you that was able to join our session today. If you have any additional questions for me or any questions related to the Canadian medical school applications or interview process in general, you can message us on email info@mdconsultants.ca, or you can send us a message over Facebook. In particular, if you want to also ask about services regarding optimizing your interview chances, there's a number of different courses and resources available, including interview preparation videos on our MD Consultants website. I will post the link here in the comments section below. And if you really liked today's session and would like to hear more from physicians like me on your unique experience, on our unique experiences and personal journey, we would be so happy to do more of these sessions. You can just let us know and we would be happy to help. All right. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Good luck.